Hey guys, we are starting another episode of the High Ground channel. I'm the one that's going to be interviewing Nick Brown, and Andy's here is going to be grilled on his question, his hard question that he's started. Hopefully we get to the bottom of it. Hopefully we display some truth to you, make you think more, and hopefully we just have a great conversation.
What's my question today?
Your question today that you have just gave...
The topic.
The topic is about the supernatural, obviously. We're getting into something very interesting about who made God. That one first strikes everybody a little bit curious. So, Andy, what inspired you to come up with this question in the first place?
All right. Well, I definitely didn't come up with this question. This is a question that's posed usually by atheists. So, who created God I've heard Richard Dawkins bring it up. He's just said, basically why bother with a God? He doesn't understand what answer it provides because in his mind, God himself demands an explanation of where did he come from. So, Christians pose to a lot of atheists, we say, you have to tell me, even in the Big Bang, that doesn't answer where things came from because it was, a singularity exploding. Mm-hmm. Where does your singularity come from? And you can keep moving that back to basically, if there's a starting point, there demands a cause for the start. Okay. And so people will say that God himself demands that, and I think that's what inspires this question. I would disagree. So
you would disagree on the presupposition, you're saying? I
would disagree that God himself is held to that same standard of demanding an origin. So
interesting. Let's just now get into your whole crux of who made God into this question, and I'll stop you in between about follow-up questions, okay. Something that sure. Strikes for the audience, definitions, anything that, I'm the simple mind here, so I'm just going to pry into your brain, okay. The complexity of this question.
Yeah, okay. So let's just dive right into it. Basically, I would start with, like you said, the idea of presuppositions. What do we presuppose when you look at the whole world? And basically what a presupposition would be it's your base assumptions that you use to interpret data, if that makes sense. So if you believed that every time, if I took this coaster and I dropped it, that ghosts from space always push it down every time, and I drop it, well, looks like I'm right. Because my presupposition was proven by my evidence or whatever it was. If you know something about the natural laws and you believe it's gravity and the laws of gravitation are going to do it, and you do the same thing, it's basically the same evidence proves two different things, if that makes sense. So your presupposition is kind of that lens that you see the world through. Mm-hmm. And I think there's two main types of presuppositions. There's the supernaturalistic and the naturalistic presupposition. Okay. So how I define those is 99% of our daily life we live over here in the naturalistic. Everything is predictable. We rely on things being predictable and following the natural laws. That means every time I cross the street, light meets my eye, I see a bus, and I know that either it's going to occupy the space in the street or I am. It can't be both, mm-hmm. Or I wouldn't be able to function. I set my drink down right here. When I go to reach for it, it's going to be here again. Almost every day, it's reaction and equal and opposite action and equal and opposite reaction. That is, and so the naturalistic presupposition goes a little further than that, and I would define it as saying everything that happens has a naturalistic cause. So you've got a lot of people on the atheistic side that will say even things that appear to be created, mm-hmm. even things we can't understand, have a natural cause. Mm-hmm. We just may not know what that natural cause is. And that's, you hear that argument over and over repeated. So the naturalistic presupposition is that all things have a natural cause, always. Mm-hmm. The supernaturalistic presupposition would say that not all things have a natural cause. Basically, super, the Latin root for over, or beyond, and natural, beyond the natural. So here I'm defining it that way, not by the ghosts and ghouls and whatnot definition that I think we a lot of times think of, mm-hmm. but simply just beyond what the natural laws account for. Okay. So the reason, for example, I would say that I would fall into this camp under the supernatural side would be in the origin story, that the presupposition of the naturalistic world has already been broken. So something came from nothing. That's a denial of the natural laws.
Yes.
If we exist, which I think we can assume, and if things maybe had a start point, we have to assume that something eventually, at one point in time, came out of nothing. And there's a lot of theories about, in the naturalistic way of thinking, about how that might work. For example, the multiverse theory, and then, like I said earlier, the Big Bang theory. But there are a lot of reasons why I would say that those are not really scientific explanations. One, the Big Bang is something out of nothing still. The multiverse theory is basically, it's a mathematical explanation. It just says, in an infinite amount of space and time, it doesn't matter what the probability of a thing is, even if it's infinitesimally small. For example, the world creates itself. Things will happen, not once, but an infinite number of times. That's what the multiverse theory says, is that infinite amount of space and time, it doesn't matter what the probability of the thing is, it's going to happen. And so it's basically, you can say whatever you want and say then it's true. That's what the multiverse theory is.
And I would almost add to that logic by saying it in the fact that just because you can have probable cause, like you said, you can roll the dice infinite number of times and you could get that cause then, it doesn't explain the meaning of why or who. It just explains what happened or how it happened. You don't explain that it's the first law of physics. It's you can't create or destroy energy. So then we're saying, okay, we have this statistical probability that there's a how, but we're still making up something. We're making up something out of nothing. So it doesn't create a answer that actually addresses the problem in the first place.
And I think you're totally right on that. I know Stephen Hawking's life work was to look at the edges of black holes and the gravity there. And in his big hypothesis that was, basically, if I were to summarize, because there is gravity, things will create themselves, if that makes sense. Which it doesn't. But I'll get to... First off, he himself admitted this is a bigger task than he could live up to. He doesn't believe that was something he was able to answer until his just recent death. But not only that, it's kind of flawed from its core, which is that basically, if you could break down the sentence like this, because there is, things will be. It's already going back to, well, why is there a law of gravity? We ourselves have this weird, we can't even think around our own laws. We're kind of so limited in the way that we think that we ourselves, we can't even examine the things that we take for granted. For example, a world in which things aren't material. You can't imagine it. But why is it even necessary that things exist materially? Why is it that natural laws exist the way that they do? And we can say how they work, but it doesn't answer the question of how they came about, why those laws are in place. And I know that can be a very annoying sounding argument, but I think it demands a look at.
I'm going to prod a little bit, and
Sure.
This might stretch you in some ways on the question itself. Do you ever think that humanity will understand that why of the creation itself? Do you think we have the capability, and expand upon that?
I mean, I think there's two possibilities. One is that we never can, because we ourselves exist inside of it, if that makes sense. We can't transcend what we exist in, if that makes sense. Like, you can't... what's a good analogy? Maybe the Jordan Peterson analysis about the chess game, or his analogy about the chess game. Where you can go by the rules of the chess game, and there's a lot of things you can do within it, but you can't change the game necessarily. And so there's one way where I think we can't change the game. We can't change the way that things have been made. We can't observe a thing which hasn't been created. Maybe we can, and here would be my second hypothesis. At some point we do. And at that point, if we do examine that, and I don't believe in God of the gaps, I actually believe that we would find a deeper evidence for God.
The creation of, and not the creation of himself, but the existence of himself. That's what you're kind of saying?
Yeah. I, for example, would fall in the camp of saying that I don't believe that in our data, in our lack of understanding, or in the things that we don't know, we have to speculate or postulate a God.
Okay.
I think the more that we find out, the more that God becomes the most logical answer.
So you're pretty much saying that science, when they say science versus God, it's not really, it's a presupposition that is false in itself.
Right. And I don't want to get totally sidetracked onto a different debate.
So let's get back to
the origins.
Who made God? And so you were going down the infinite number, the statistical probability, the answering that maybe what and how it was created. And so from that, where do we go with our answer, with Christianity itself? But what do we have to say to it, especially to those people that ask those questions?
So let's leave the naturalist behind. And so I think that it's obvious that this is an issue even in atheism, based on the fact that, for example, someone like Stephen Hawking would base his life around finding the answer to it. Mm-hmm. It's clearly an answer that has not been provided yet. Where did things come from? How do we come to be? So now comes a person who says, well, I believe God created it. I don't believe that, for example, the laws of entropy would allow that things would order themselves the way that they've been ordered. Mm-hmm. I think there's too much out there that looks designed for me to call that a coincidence. Okay. Not only that, I'm going to say that it's clear that the natural laws are broken. Things exist.
Right.
So why would I not speculate that there's something supernatural over or beyond the natural laws themselves?
Okay.
So we start with that. And then what does it mean for something to be supernatural or to be beyond those things, or for God to be a supernatural being? Well, people will say he demands an origin. Mm-hmm. No, because he's beyond the natural. Does that make sense? We are stuck in a way of thinking that says all things demand an origin. Okay. That's only true under the naturalistic way of thinking. Not all things demand an origin under the supernaturalistic way of thinking. So God himself doesn't need an origin. Right. He exists around time. Time is a construct that I think God himself made. That would be another way of thinking that you can't grasp.
Right.
Can you fathom a world in which time is not, doesn't hold? Does that make sense? A world that doesn't operate under time? Right. No, we can't even grasp it. It's another thing we're forced to take for granted.
Right.
And I think it's, every time I run up against this, the more I see my natural limitations, the more I feel created.
Right.
I feel like there's been an artificial wall created over the things that I can conceptualize and rationalize. That's, to me, indicate even more so that I've been created lesser, or at least not transcended my own creation. And so I do believe that the logical way then to think is that something has happened that has broken the natural laws. Mm-hmm. You can't be a naturalist, I think, in every way of thinking. There's almost no way under the origin of the universe, as well as, like I said, just examining the things that we take for granted to basically say all things must be natural and just come rationally. I mean, the fact that we just be sitting here is just a logical outworking of things just existing.
Right.
So that's why I would fall in. God, basically, where does God come from? Short answer: he didn't come from anything.
Right.
God was the thing. God is the thing that is beyond. He's the thing that started time. Yeah. He's the thing that created something from nothing. Mm-hmm. He's the thing that doesn't demand physical origin. Mm-hmm. He doesn't lie. He himself is not subject to the laws that he created. Mm-hmm. He's not subject to time. He created time. He's not subject to the